In this exercise and the following a few, we are going to develop a game engine, something like this. As you can see, something is flying across, let's call it UFO. And then in yellow one here is a shooter. You can see the barrel follows the mouse pointer. As I click the mouse, it shoots a missile, and then as it reaches at the mouse pointer, it explodes. Using four arrow keys, I can move the shooter. In doing so, we need to consider several things. First, this kind of animation is done by drawing the canvas. So within this window, let's call it canvas. In this canvas, you need to keep drawing the picture and picture and picture. And then as you draw pictures with a slightly different location of the UFO every time, then you can see that the UFO looks like it's flying and the like. So that's called animation technique. Animation is like a movie film. So within 1 second, you just display the pictures, show the pictures again and again, again, again. So that's called the frames per second. 20 frames per second means every second you draw the whole canvas 20 times and they keep drawing that with the changes of this oval blue things. Then the overall effect is the moving animated effect. So in doing so, we first need to develop animation loop, or in game area, it's called the game loop in doing so. So let's create the project to do so. So let's begin with a new project. Let's call it game engine. Okay. So game engine is a MVC architecture. So model, view, controller. So in controller, we begin with the main class as usual. Public static void main string array. So we will do create window. Let's call it win new my window like, and then we are going to initialize the basic setup, and then we call it set default close operation and the like. So let's create my window class first. Extend the JFrame, then initial configuration is a size, let's give 700 by 500. Set location, let's have a 300 by 200. Set title, game engine. There. So let's import this one. And then in this game, we are going to have access to the window in several places, and then we need to have access quickly, since we are going to do something like 20 frames per second, 30 frames per second. So we need to redraw the whole canvas that many times per second. To save time in accessing those things, let me define those frequently accessed one as a public member. So without calling method, we can have access directly. So here main class, without creating main object, so we want to allow window object directly, then we need to define static my window win object. So window is created like that. Set default close operation, exit on close, set visible true. So we have a basic setup of that. And then in the window, we are going to draw something. So that is, we need to have a canvas. So on a view, let's create my canvas. To be a canvas in Java window, it should be child class of a JPanel. So JPanel is a container as well as it's a basic of the canvas is there as well. So in the center of the content of pane, we are going to put the canvas. So border, layout, center, canvas there. So here we are going to create a canvas, but canvas we have access very frequently and many times during the second and so on. So let's define as a public member. It's there. So canvas is new my canvas there. So center of the content pane canvas is there. So we are going to draw things on this canvas. So how do we do so? We will take a look at shortly. So we have a basic setup of the window done. Then let's consider how we may do some loop things. So basically what we are going to do is the things to be drawn on the canvas, we need to define as a collection. So from that collection, we are going to do those drawing things. So that would be a model. So anything that should appear on the animation scene or game scene, it should be inside some huge container. Let's call it as a game data class. And game data class will hold everything that should be drawn on the screen. So that's requires a frequently access as well. So let's define game data as a public member there. Then let's create game data object there. And then another thing to consider is once the game program starts, it should get into game loop. Since you need to draw something and then just to repeat it, so game loop will look like as follows. Game loop. So the basic game loop is as long as the game is being played. So let's have a flag. So when the game quits, we can quit it based on the flag. So let's have a running flag. So public static boolean running is there. So in the game loop, we just say running is true, then while running, then just keep repeating something. That is called the game loop. So basic idea of a game loop is first game data we just need to update. So imagine the UFO flying across I showed you. So each time it should just update the game data. The UFO should be in the game data. It should update each time. And then on the canvas, so we have a window, and we have a canvas. We are going to define a method called render. So render on the canvas, just repeat this process again and again. That is called the game loop. But however, we want to control how fast you want to do this game loop. So this is called the game loop. Update, render. So we want to have it in a certain speed control. So let's define the number of frames per second. So public static int frames per second. Suppose that we want to have 20 frames per second, something like that. Then based on that, we should make this loop 20 times of iteration per second. That is required. Then how do you control such is at the very beginning of the game loop, get the start time, at this moment. So you can get time from the system, that is a current time milliseconds. That is a number of milliseconds since 1970 January 1st. That is done, and then after doing update and then render, let's get time again at this moment. Then the difference is time spent for update and render. Then our goal is, our goal is 20 frames per second, then each iteration, each frame should take 1 over 20 second. So that's the idea. So here, based on that, let's compute the long time spent is end time minus start time. Then iteration is 1 over frames per second is how much time you should go in each iteration. Then in terms of milliseconds, 1000 divided by frames per second is how much time you spend one iteration. If you have 20 frames per second, this is 50 milliseconds. So one iteration should be 50 milliseconds, but you have spent this many milliseconds. Just subtract time spent. Then this is a time you need to sleep before you go to the next iteration. So that is a sleep time. You need to sleep this much before you go to the next frame. So here, those both of them are integers. So let's change to double, and then here we need to convert the result into long type. Then we have computed a sleep time to guarantee the frames per second. How to sleep is using thread sleep method, sleep time. And this sleep requires it generates exception, so we need to put try catch within that. So that's the basic idea of the game loop. Let me explain this game loop one more time. So since our goal is a certain number of frames per second, that's frames per second. Suppose it's 20 frames per second means in each iteration 1 over 20, so 1000 millisecond per 20 is 50 millisecond. So if you spend one iteration of the loop 50 milliseconds, then overall we get 20 frames per second. So how do you guarantee 50 milliseconds is in each game loop you are going to update all the data on the game scene and then render it on the canvas. So measure the time which took to do update and render. So that is a time spent. Then this one is a millisecond per frame for iteration is computed and then get subtract and then sleep that time, then this loop is guaranteed approximately, not very precisely though, approximately given frames per second is guaranteed. So that's how we make a game loop. So here on the canvas, we need a render method which will draw all the game data in the on the canvas, and then the game data we need to provide update method which should be called within the game loop. So that's the very basic setup of the game loop.